Rings of Power is one of the most controversial shows currently in the fantasy community. And unfortunately, there are a lot of controversial shows nowadays. Oftentimes scrolling through online comment sections, I am absolutely baffled by how vicious and hateful people get towards this show, acting as if it is the most offensive and outrageous project ever put to screen. Before I go any further, I would just like to personally state that while I enjoyed Rings of Power, I am not blind to its many massive flaws. I've been wanting to make this video for a while now, talking about why exactly this show gets so much hate, and why I don't think it necessarily deserves the amount of negativity I see thrown at it online. Now, before really getting into it, I would like to make an invitation to discuss this show and its flaws in the comments, but ask that we keep conversations respectful, using critical analysis rather than hateful speech. I've only recently gotten into making videos, and one of the biggest surprises has been how much I've enjoyed interacting with the fantasy community. And moving forward, I would like to establish my channel as one not of negativity towards people or properties, but of critical analysis and general positivity. I am incredibly tired of living in a pessimistic manner where I view every upcoming TV show or movie in a negative light. I understand that the current state of Hollywood is fairly dreary and oversaturated, but I grew up loving filmmaking and watching movies with my dad. I would like to recapture that passion. And a part of that begins with creating a space where I can feel optimistic about projects as they are coming out. And if they are less than what I'd hoped for, critically analyzing in a respectful way that doesn't degrade or put anyone down. Now, nearly 2 years since its release, there have been thousands of video essays on the Rings of Power. And almost all of them that have been recommended to me are incredibly negative, though some are pretty fair. So from this point forward, if a fair but overall positive reflection isn't what you're looking for in a Rings of Power analysis, I won't be offended if you decide to leave. But for those who are planning on watching, I don't usually like to ask for subscribers, but if you are interested in joining a community focused on being fair and merciful towards fantasy projects, I'd love it if you could join and comment down below. I love reading all the different opinions, and I try to respond to everyone that I can. Now, without further ado, here's my defense of Rings of Power. One of the many recurring trends I've seen where people say they don't like Rings of Power is through invoking Tolkien's name, and stating that the Amazon series is not only a monumental travesty, but is a sacrilege to everything Tolkien believed and stood for. It's important to remember that Christopher Tolkien, son of J.R.R. Tolkien himself, absolutely hated the live-action Lord of the Rings movies, and strongly implied that were his father alive, he would have been incredibly against the movies. In regards to the adaptations, he had this to say: Tolkien has become a monster, devoured by his own popularity and absorbed into the absurdity of our time. The chasm between the beauty and seriousness of the work and what it has become has overwhelmed me. The commercialization has reduced the aesthetic and philosophical impact of the creation to nothing. There is only one solution for me: to turn my head away. They eviscerated the book by making it an action movie for young people aged 15 to 25. Now, do not get me wrong, I absolutely love the Peter Jackson trilogy, and they are my favorite films of all time. But the point I'm trying to make here is that if people are going to continue to criticize Rings of Power, they need to recognize that while Tolkien would probably agree with them and hate the show, he would be no fan of the other live-action works either. Furthermore, I just want to put it out there, and I hate that I even need to have to say this, but elves having short hair and characters being other races than white is not a valid criticism of Rings of Power. I simply do not care if you think that Tolkien's world should only have white males in it. If you do think that, then seek help. One of Tolkien's strongest and most prevalent themes in all of his works are, when people from different races and backgrounds come together, that is when the greatest deeds are accomplished. So if you think Middle-earth having different skin tones other than white is anti-Tolkien, then I would prefer not to trade words with you. Moving back into the series, I would just like to state that while there are many clunky aspects of the story, there are numerous Tolkien themes that are incredibly prevalent throughout Rings of Power. And as much as the Harfoot storyline bugs me, if you go ahead and ignore the majority of them, there are some powerful themes of friendship and camaraderie found within Nori's family. Now, if only those themes had extended to the rest of the Harfoots, then maybe they would have deserved to have even been in the show. But as it stands right now, they were a completely useless subplot that added nothing to the story and only existed to add hobbits and maybe Gandalf? I really hope not, but there's like a 99% chance that it is. Also, as much as I didn't really care for Bronwyn or her storyline, her conversation with Theo about light beyond darkness, which, yes, is lifted straight from Sam in Return of the King, is absolutely dripping with themes of Tolkien because guess what? It comes straight from the books. Whenever the series is trying to emulate elements from the books, that's when it's at its strongest thematically. The issue is more often than not, they try to emulate the Peter Jackson movies, with many elements being callbacks to the movies. Lastly, in terms of Tolkien, I wanted to talk about the necessity for a show like this even existing in the first place. I know that many people often complain that you need to just let a good thing lie, and exploiting content just to earn more money is a sick trend in Hollywood. And while I agree that reusing content over and over again until it becomes bloated is an absolutely annoying trend in the film industry, I would like to advocate for the urge to tell new stories within familiar worlds. In fiction, there are some worlds that have stood the test of time as some of the most beloved and memorable settings in all of storytelling. And while certain stories absolutely should end while they're ahead, I'm not necessarily opposed to the exploration of new stories within that same world. And in fact, neither is Tolkien. Samwise Gamgee says it best in The Two Towers as he and Frodo sit on the secret stairs leading up to Cirith Ungol. Sam recalls the tale of Beren, a mortal man from the First Age, and likens his quest for the Silmaril to their quest into Mordor, carrying some of the light of the same Silmaril inside the vial of Galadriel. The quote goes, "Why, to think of it, we're in the same tale still. It's going on. Don't the great tales never end?" "No, they never end as tales," said Frodo, "but the people in them come and go when their part's ended. Our part will end later, or sooner." This quote really drives home the point I'm trying to make, about why the continuation of stories isn't always a bad thing. Though, like Frodo states, as long as the people in them come and go when their part is ended, many spin-offs usually forget about that key element. The things I can absolutely sing the praises of in this show are visuals and score. And when you get two powerhouses like John Howe and Bear McCreary working on the show, those elements were basically a guaranteed success going into it. Many people say that this show doesn't really feel like Middle-earth, and I've never really understood that argument. I think maybe what they're trying to say is it doesn't feel like Peter Jackson's movies, but even then I disagree. The set design and world building in this show is top notch. Each location and race has such a distinct vibe, with unique architecture and costuming. It is always so easy to tell where you are in any given scene, due to how memorable a lot of these locations are. Whether or not you disliked the series, it is impossible to watch and not remember which kingdom is which, regardless of whether you remember their actual names. Then, paired with the score, Rings of Power is elevated to another level. I remember being heartbroken when I found out that Howard Shore would only be working on the title theme, but Bear McCreary knocked it out of the park. Between this series and God of War, he is quickly becoming a favorite of mine. Each location uses different instruments and motifs to convey the types of people represented in each kingdom, and watching his video on the music theory behind Sauron's theme was unbelievably cool.
All my villain themes tend to be compacted, and this one is circular. I'm just drawing a ring, that's what he wants.
Moving into overall essence, as someone well engrossed within the universe of Middle-earth, I never felt like what I saw on screen was a misrepresentation of the world of Tolkien, and it always felt like The Lord of the Rings to me. The only real issues I have with this show boil down to characters and storylines, but everything about this show screams Middle-earth in my opinion. If you disagree, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to understand more about why some people don't think this show is an accurate representation of Middle-earth as a whole. Moving past visuals and essence, the story of Season 1 is pretty disjointed to say the least. All of our 4 main storylines exist apart from each other and have very little overlap. As I mentioned earlier, the Harfoot storyline literally serves no purpose other than to add one more mystery person for the audience to assume is Sauron, which, quick side tangent, the mystery box form of storytelling utilized in this season is by far the thing I hated more than anything else. I really don't understand the purpose of changing the story up for the sole purpose of wanting even the die-hard fans to not know what comes next. That's horrible reasoning, and I hope they learned from their mistakes. But aside from the one true main storyline with Galadriel, and I plan on covering her in depth later, Season 1 is almost entirely about setup. And that is the whole point of this season, for better or worse. The showrunners decided that they wanted the first season to serve as a lengthy and laborious prologue, meant to show how the kingdoms of Middle-earth operate during times of peace. As someone who has long desired to see what the kingdoms of Khazad-dûm, Lindon, and most of all Numenor look like, I'll admit I had a lot of fun with this, even if it wasn't all that compelling narratively. I do worry that the showrunners overestimated the loyalty of the fanbase, and figured that an entire season worth of setup would be welcomed with open arms, and that the majority of viewers would respond with, "That's okay, can't wait to see where it goes next." Instead, I worry about the damage they have done for the rest of the series. I plan on delving into the future of Rings of Power near the end of the video, but I would just like to say that while all this excessive setup might pay off in the end, it really didn't send a great message off the bat. Moving forward, there will be major spoilers for the first season. I know that most people probably don't care, but here it is anyway. So as we all know, Halbrand is revealed to be Sauron at the end of the first season, and I will hardly be the first to say that I was extremely dissatisfied with this reveal and very annoyed at the writers. Throughout the entirety of the season, I hadn't really been hoping that Gil-galad would have been revealed to be Sauron in disguise, which would have accounted for his ridiculous behavior this season. For example, trying to get rid of Galadriel so she'll stop looking for Sauron, wanting to get his hands on Mithril for convoluted reasons, and overall just being an unpleasant person the entire time. But instead, it was Halbrand, who, like many people, I was rooting for him to turn into a Nazgul, or maybe even the Witch King of Angmar. Here's where I'm gonna get a little controversial though, because the more I thought about this, the more I actually started to get behind it. Now, granted, the majority of my opinions on this are going to be directly affected by how they handle things moving forward in Season 2, but Sauron being Halbrand works canonically. Sure, they played around with a few elements and changed up his name, but specifically I am referring to the fact that Sauron was attempting to flee Middle-earth and abandoning his desires to dominate all life. In the Silmarillion, a book detailing the history of Middle-earth, we learn that Sauron was originally nothing more than a lieutenant. Granted, a very powerful lieutenant, but nonetheless a servant of a much more deadly, much darker lord, Morgoth. Towards the end of the Silmarillion, we learn about the Great War which culminated in Morgoth's defeat, and subsequent banishment into the Void. After that, Sauron was absolutely terrified of the Valar, the other big and powerful gods who had just come and destroyed his master. And in his fear, there was a period where he sought forgiveness. In a conversation between Sauron and Eonwe, the herald of the Valar, Sauron asks if he can be forgiven and return to live in Valinor, to which Eonwe informs him that he must come before the Valar and receive their judgment to find out. Now, Sauron freaks out because by this point he had already done plenty of horrible stuff, so he assumes for himself that there will be no mercy, and instead runs away into exile for many years. This is a plot point we don't know a ton about, and it is something that really interests me about Season 2. Learning more about Sauron's backstory and motivations is a prospect that, as long as they do it right, really excites me. So many people are quick to jump on the script and say, Sauron is pure evil, he can't genuinely want to repent. And while there's no way to prove his sincerity, it ties perfectly into one of Tolkien's themes, and literally the first line of the entire series.
Nothing is evil in the beginning.
Even Sauron's master, Morgoth, didn't start out as evil. So if they decide to flesh out some of the complicated aspects of Sauron and show how he can be morally gray sometimes, I'm okay with that. Though I know so many people are going to hate it. We even see this in the finale of Season 1, where Sauron asks Galadriel to rule with him and help bind him to the light. He is seeking a way to amend for his mistakes. But even in this conversation, we see that he still doesn't get it. He wants to repent, but his plan to rule with Galadriel isn't going to make things better. It's going to make it worse. And the fact that he can't understand why that's a bad thing is what makes him such an interesting character in my opinion. I'll have to keep a discerning eye on him moving forward, but if done right, I think I could come to enjoy this interpretation of Sauron, especially since in Season 2, there are rumors that we'll get some of his shape-shifting abilities, as it is rumored that 3 actors will now share the role of Sauron, and the subplot of him coming to Eregion in the guise of Anatar is supposedly going to be a major plot point, which I would be really happy about, but we'll just have to wait and see. Throughout season 1, there is a storyline which, in my opinion, shouldn't even be an element of the show. Aside from a scene in the first episode where a mysterious meteor passes over the heads of all the main characters, there is no connection between this storyline and the plot. And I know for a fact that the only reason this storyline is even in the show is because in a direct quote from the showrunners they state, "You can't have Lord of the Rings without hobbits." Now, I don't want to spend any time in this video talking about the Harfoots. Aside from Galadriel, they seem to be the main point of contention among disgruntled viewers, and there is little I can say about them that hasn't already been said before. So instead I wanted to focus my analysis on their storyline on the inclusion of the Stranger, which seems to be the main reason for this subplot even existing at all. I still don't understand why they couldn't have just had the first episode of season 2 be the entirety of the Harfoot storyline, but it is what it is, and hopefully it lays the groundwork for a better story down the line. I don't have a ton to say about the Stranger, but I just wanted to talk briefly about the speculation surrounding his character. In the season finale, we learn at long last that the Stranger is in fact not Sauron, but is instead a mysterious other known as an Astari, or wizard. Fans of The Lord of the Rings will note that this basically narrows the identity of the Stranger down to 5 possible candidates, and there are numerous theories on who it could be. I for one would be happy if we got to learn about one of the Blue Wizards, and their journey to Rune next season makes that seem likely, since what little we do know about the Blue Wizards is that they disappeared into the east and are rumored to have started cults of magic, which perhaps is where the cultists from season 1 came from. However, as much as I want this to be true, I am willing to bet that the wizard is going to be none other than Gandalf. Aside from the obvious parallel to his connection with the halflings, and the fact that he literally uses a Gandalf quote in the finale, I just don't think the showrunners could resist the opportunity to include Gandalf in a Lord of the Rings project. And I think the proof is in their attitude towards the Harfoots. If they claim you can't have a Lord of the Rings story without hobbits, then it stands to reason you can't have one without Gandalf either. He is the most popular and recognizable character in the franchise after all. Now, while this would kind of upset me because this is a direct lore break, I think I could learn to get over it. An adaptation needs to take some creative liberty, and even the Peter Jackson trilogy changed plenty of things. The 2 major lore reasonings for why it shouldn't be Gandalf are as follows. In the history of the One Ring, we learned that the 5 Istari arrived in the Grey Havens around the time of Sauron's uprising/fall. And secondly, in a throwaway line from Faramir in The Two Towers, where he lists the many names of Gandalf and in which region they use them, Faramir quotes Gandalf saying, "To the east I go not." And to that I say, sure, that would be a canon break if he goes to Rune, I guess. But honestly, it's over such a tiny detail. Plus, you could always rationalize it and say, maybe he did go there, and something bad happened, so what he's really saying is he doesn't go back anymore. But the Grey Havens moment being nixed does bother me a little bit, but ultimately isn't a huge deal so long as they find a convenient way for him to end up with the Ring of Fire. We see the meteor carrying the Stranger appear at the exact moment that Galadriel decides to bail on the ship leaving for Valinor. So you could say that the Valar, in their wisdom, saw that her actions would lead to the return of Sauron, and in that moment, sent the Astari, which, in case you didn't know, their sole purpose in Middle-earth is to watch for Sauron and help prevent his takeover. Plus, there's no proof that the meteor we saw in the pilot was just one meteor. In fact, it would be kind of crazy if it was. So for all we know, that could have been the 5 wizards being sent to Middle-earth, which I don't love, but I could learn to live with so long as they make it compelling. Finally, I would just like to state, and I know some people are gonna roll their eyes and hate this, but if Nori is the one who ends up coining the name Gandalf, I actually wouldn't mind that. I think it would actually make a lot of sense considering that's how all the hobbits refer to him. In fact, Gandalf's real name is Olorin, but if you pay attention, you'll see he has different names all across Middle-earth, because he kind of just lets people call him whatever they want. Galadriel is where a lot of people really struggle with the show, and there are many criticisms to be made about her character, ranging from totally justifiable to completely absurd. For my breakdown, I'm going to avoid the conversation about whether Galadriel should be the powerful commander of the elven armies. There is evidence in the Silmarillion that she was a strong and capable elf, having Tolkien go so far as to say that she surpassed many male elves in athletic feats, and her elven name, Nerwin literally translates to man-maiden because of her strength. So if you have a problem with Galadriel being a warrior, I disagree and would encourage you to look inward and see if this is the result of some internalized bias. My main issue with her character is her overall demeanor and attitude towards everyone on the show. Like I said, there have been thousands of video essays ripping apart Galadriel for the way she handles situations, and how her brashness can often be unbearable. And while I agree that there are many parts of this that did bother me, I will ultimately come to accept it as long as she undergoes a very thorough character arc where we eventually see her become the Galadriel we know from the Third Age. Personally, the biggest issue I have with her character is we never get to see her as she was. I think it would have been a much more powerful arc if you had her start off the season a little less haughty and maybe just chilling in Lindon, having the trek into the north instead being carried out by other elves. Then you could have them find evidence of Sauron, and only upon bringing it back do we see Galadriel confront her past and struggle to suppress her emotions. This could lead towards her spiral of anger and hatred, culminating in that moment, which I still love, where Adar basically tells her she's just as bad as Sauron. That moment was so satisfying to see after an entire season where I was beginning to worry that her actions would never go punished in any major way. I have seen many people complain that the elves don't feel like the elves we know from Lord of the Rings, and they shouldn't. That's a good thing. The Third Age elves we are familiar with from Jackson's trilogy are the last remnants of a tragic race, doomed to relinquish the world over to the dominion of men. Their time is over, and the few elves that are still there are the oldest, wisest, and saddest of them all. If you think that elves with hot tempers are a break from Tolkien's work, then you need to read the Silmarillion, where an elf and his army literally slaughter their kinsmen because they refuse to give them some boats. By the end of the series, I imagine there will be a pretty big shift in tone both within the elves and thematically as a whole, because, spoiler alert, a ridiculous amount of people are going to die in this show, including most of the main characters. The War of the Last Alliance is incredibly devastating, and many characters and kingdoms will be gone before the series is over. Galadriel is the character I am the most anxious about moving forward, because even though Season 1 hardly taps into the source material and is mostly about setting up, in the books, she isn't a huge player in the war moving forward. I will be fine if she continues to be a main character, but she shouldn't be leading every battle against Sauron. At some point, we need to see her begin her ruling of Lothlorien and reunite with Celeborn. This is another rabbit hole altogether. And I'm crossing my fingers it'll be solved because Celeborn is cast for Season 2, but Galadriel is supposed to have a daughter by now, which shouldn't be a big deal, but her daughter marries Elrond, and together they have Arwen. So unless Galadriel also has a daughter she failed to mention, I'm going to really struggle with the implications that Elrond is going to marry someone who hasn't been born yet. I know age is different with the elves when you're talking about a matter of thousands of years, but just as a viewer, I think that would be a hard pill to swallow. Lastly, I do want to state that some people have issues with someone like Celebrimbor looking older than Galadriel, when she's supposed to be much older than him, but that doesn't really bother me. I don't think an elf's physical appearance is always a strong indicator of how old they're really supposed to be. Galadriel was far from my favorite character, but I'm willing to be patient and trust that we've only seen 20% of the story. When the first season was coming out, one of the things I did was follow the showrunners very closely. I remember reading just about every news article that came out, and I was constantly evaluating them to make sure they really understood the importance of the story they were telling. I even went so far as to listen to podcasts recorded by longtime Tolkien fans that had gotten the chance to meet the creators. And through all that research, I felt pretty confident that the show was in good hands. While my overall opinion of the first season wasn't the highest, I've said this before, and after rewatching the show a couple months back, I can still confirm that I do enjoy it. Now, there are many things I want to see changed in the next season, but I am willing to once again put my faith in J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, and hope that they can deliver a well-written and entertaining season of television that succeeds in transporting me back into Middle-earth. I do think that these showrunners suffered from a bit of inexperience the first time around, but I am optimistic that they can work towards tweaking some of the weaker aspects. In an interview following Season 1, and concerning some of the fan disapproval, they had this to say: "The entire making of the show has been a massive learning experience for everyone involved. Some people had nice things to say about the pilot, or they didn't have nice things to say. But I hope they stay for more episodes. The bar has to keep going up. I do want to state that there have been other things they've said that have not left me as thrilled, but the idea that they are receptive to criticism and willing to learn from their mistakes does give me at least some hope. One thing that does leave me extremely discouraged, however, is the fact that season 2 finished filming amidst the writer's strike. Now, it does appear that the majority of the season was filmed with the writers still on board, and only towards the last little bit did they continue without the writers or showrunners. So there's at least a chance they left enough detailed notes, and were far enough along that it didn't hurt them too much, but it does make me nervous. The other silver lining is that most filmmaking processes usually involve filming the stunts and action-heavy sequences towards the end, so there's a chance that it was mostly just stunt work and all the important dialogue and character sections had already been finished. Only time will tell, but it does make me nervous for its success. To end the video, I just want to emphasize that I understand Rings of Power is far from a perfect show, but I enjoyed it, and what's more, I want to be able to enjoy it. I seriously doubt this show is going to get canceled anytime soon with how much money they're pumping into it. It's possible that it could get canceled, but even though there was a murky reception, it at least performed exceptionally well for Prime Video, especially in those early weeks. So I for one would hate to withstand nearly a decade of a TV show coming out. That only serves to upset me and make me long for the possibility that one day, a good show covering the first and second age of Middle-earth will come out. And as far as being unfaithful to the lore goes, they haven't really done anything too egregious yet, in my opinion. Sure, basically everything from season 1 is fabricated, since it is setting the stage for the rise of Sauron, but the changes they have made haven't been a huge deal to me. The timeline crunch, which is the biggest change by far, completely makes sense to me. The original story takes place over thousands of years, and it would have been very annoying for all of the human and dwarf characters to be constantly cycling out every couple of episodes. I will say that the Mithril origin does frustrate me a ton, but they do state that it is an apocryphal myth, and I'm just choosing to believe that's what it is. Lord of the Rings has been such an important part of my life, and watching the appendices growing up is what originally got me interested in digital media production. So if a show is going to be coming out whether I like it or not, I'd rather try to view it with an optimistic outlook, and at least make an effort to enjoy it. Time will tell how difficult that becomes, but for the time being, I think the issues with season 1 aren't nearly as atrocious as some people are making them out to be. I'm fully prepared to eat my words if season 2 sucks. And if even a single one of those outlandish story leaks floating around online turns out to be true, then I guess I'll just stop watching the show. But again, if you're interested in having meaningful, constructive, and uplifting conversations about fantasy, consider commenting and subscribing. And I'd love to have more people to talk shop with while we wait for any news on season 2.